Hi guys, I am going to do this extra review with you. So hopefully this will help you. So first of all, don't forget you have your checklist. You want to go through your checklist and make sure you know how to do everything on this list. Okay. You want to be able to identify the difference between a rational number and an irrational number. Your calculator will help you with this because you can look for any terminating decimals or repeating decimals that would be rational. Okay, so the square root of 81 is equal to 9, so that's going to be rational. 56.5191 repeating is a repeating decimal, so that's going to be rational. The square root of 83, or radical 83, is going to be irrational because it's a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal. 24 pi just means 24 times pi. And if you can type that in your calculator if you want, it's going to be a non-terminating, non-repeating decimal, irrational. Okay, so 90.790170. There is no repeating, so irrational. Okay, 60 over 52. Anything that can be written as a ratio of integers, meaning a fraction with an integer in the numerator and an integer in the denominator, is always going to be rational. Okay, which statement is not always true? Well, this talks about closure. So one thing we want to remember about closure is irrational numbers are not closed. So when you do an operation with two irrational numbers, you don't know the answer until you do it. So this is not always true, choice 2, because again, I don't know the answer until I do it. Okay, if we look below, that's 1/2 times 3/4. Rational times rational will always equal rational. And if we look here, this is 1/2 times radical 3 over 4, which is irrational. That's going to equal irrational. Okay, even though that's a fraction, that's irrational because radical 3 is not an integer. Which domain would you use? Now I got to move again. Which domain would you use for the number of plane trips? So how many times have you flown on a plane? I've never flown on a plane, so 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. So I would say whole numbers is good. Now, if it's multiple choice, you might not see what you want to see, so you have to look for something that is the best possible option. Times. Can't be negative. So probably something like positive rational or positive real. Okay. And here we go. Simplify. Okay, so the idea of simplifying is that you're looking for two factors of 75, one of which is a perfect square. So I'm looking at 75 and I'm thinking factors of 75. So my choices are 1 in 75, 3 in 25, and that's actually going to work. The square root of 25 is 5, so I get 10 radical 3. You can check this in your calculator. If you enter this in your calculator and you enter this in your calculator, they should have equal decimals. Square root of 80, I'm going to break down into 16 and 5. Okay, possibilities for 80 are 1 in 80, 2 in 40, 4 in 20, and then 5 in 16, which I wrote. So that becomes 4 radical 5. Okay, remember you can use your calculator to help you. If you're not sure of the factors, you can use your calculator. If you're not sure of the perfect squares, you can also use your calculator. Multiply, then simplify. So the idea of multiplication is that you do the coefficient with the coefficient. So 2 times 3 is 6. You do the radicand with the radicand. So 12 times 2 is 24. And then if you can simplify, you should. So I'm going to break down the 24 into 4 times 6. 4 is a perfect square. So that's going to give me 6 times 2 radical 6, which becomes 12 radical 6, because you multiply the coefficients. Okay. And again, you can check this on your calculator. Rationalize the denominator. So what that means is we want the denominator to be a rational number. So it's not about the numerator, it's about the denominator. So I basically take the denominator and I copy it. And I copy it into a fraction, radical 3 over radical 3, because I'm essentially multiplying by 1. When you multiply by 1, you don't change the value. It might look different, but it's going to have the same value. Okay? So that gives me radical 60. 20 times 3 is 60 over 3. Okay, now I'm thinking about radical 60. Can I simplify that? It's 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12 is probably the 4, 6 and 10. So I'm going to use 4 and 15. Okay, so that becomes the square root of 4 times the square root of 15 over 3, which then becomes 2 radical 15 over 3. Now, I know a lot of you want to do 15 divided by 3, but you can't. The 3 is not under a radical. So you can only do radicand with radicand. So the 3 cannot be divided into the 15 because the 3 is not under a radical sign. Okay, so I'm going to multiply by radical 6 over radical 6 because remember, it's about the denominator. So whatever is in the denominator is what I use. That gives me 5 radical 18 over the number 6. And I'm going to try to reduce the 18. So the 18 would reduce to a 9 and a 2. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 is a perfect square. Okay. The square root of 9 is the whole number 3. So that's 5 times 3 radical 2 over 6, which gives me 15 radical 2 over 6. Now, you can simplify the fractional part, the 15 over 6, if you want to, because there's a common factor of 3, but you can also leave it like that if you want, okay? If you want to simplify it, I'll put it right here. They both have a common factor of 3, so that would be 5 radical 2 over 2, okay? Your calculator will also simplify fractions for you. Okay, convert 40 miles per hour into feet per second. So you start with the 40 miles over 1 hour, and that's my given, miles per hour. I'm trying to get to feet per second, so I'm going to do miles to feet, hours to minutes, minutes to seconds, and that's going to give me an answer. So I'm going to do, there are 5,280 feet in 1 mile. 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes. 1 minute is equal to 60 seconds. Okay, now remember this works because every fraction that I'm adding is essentially a 1. 5,280 feet is equal to 1 mile. 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes. 1 minute is equal to 60 seconds. So I'm not changing the value of 40 miles per hour. I'm just going to change the way it looks because I'm multiplying it essentially by 3 different ones. Okay, so now you would need your calculator. You want to hit alpha x to get the fractions. In the numerator, it's 40 times 5,280. And in the denominator, it's 60 times 60. That gives me 176 over 3. When I do the division, I get 58.6 repeating. That's the same as 2/3, so if you want to write 2/3, you can. And that's in feet per second. Okay? You also want to make sure that you know your properties. So you want to look in your packet at the properties page. So for example, 3 plus 4 is the same as 4 plus 3. That's the commutative property of addition. 2 times the quantity x plus 3 is equal to 2x plus 6. That's the distributive property of multiplication over addition. You can just call it the distributive property. Okay? If you were going to solve an equation, say I had the equation x minus 4 equals 12, and I go to solve that, I would use the addition property of equality. The properties of equality are what you use to solve equations. So make sure you study your properties of equality and your real number properties. Thanks for watching. Have a great night. Study, study.